Recording is on.
Hi, it's Pank from PankHnO Paris, friends. I hope you're well. And today I want to talk with you and with Pascoe and Ed about Silva method. And it's very nice for me to be together because Ed, it's the encyclopedia in Silva method. Lee, you know her. She do so a great job in France, in Europe, in all the French country. So it's great for us, and for French people that we do with Lee every weeks some talk together, and we talk about the method, the different stuff you can work, and how you can discover that. So first, I will let Lee introduce herself, and after we will ask to Ed the first question, and the first talk will be about that. Who is Ed, and how he discovered the Silva method? How we feel about that? How with the all this time and experience, how he live with that? I think we will learn a lot. So I'm very happy about that. Lee.
Yeah. Okay. Well, some of you will know me already, Lee Pascoe. I'm actually Australian in origin, but I finished up by a weird quirk of fate being the director of the Silva method in France with my late husband, Michael Dodson, who Ed will remember extremely well. And I'm delighted Ed can be with us because although I could give a certain amount of information to Pank about the history and the beginnings are out of my ken because I didn't arrive on the Silva scene until 1988. Well, at least in the States. So I was organizing classes before then. But Ed has been around for a long time before that. And even before Ed arrived, Ed had so much time directly with Jose Silva pumping his brain. So he will be able to tell us all sorts of things about the origins of the Silva method that I could never have done. And I love the expression, Ed is the encyclopedia of the Silva method. So welcome to our little interview, Ed, and we'll keep it really informal because it's more like friends chatting with each other. So that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ed, the encyclopedia. You can to introduce you like you want. Feel free and be happy.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I first took the Silva method, Silva mind control course in 1975. And a little later, when I got to meet some of the people who were in the very first class, first public paid class in 1966, they were like ancient ancestors. I thought, oh my gosh, those people had been here forever compared to me. 2 years later, when I came to instructor training and I met more of them, it just seemed like they had been doing it for centuries. And nowadays, I'm one of the old timers, right? So things do shift. I took the course to help my weightlifting. That was all. I'd had polio when I was 5 years old and had to exercise to get back to where I could walk again. And Dr. Bennett had recommended to me as a teenager, he said, nobody ever does calisthenics. I could give you a calisthenics course, but nobody does that. He suggested I get a set of weights and just follow the instructions. So nothing in moderation. I go to extremes with everything. So I really got into weightlifting, left it for a while, 30 years old, just having some aches and pains. So I realized I needed to get back to exercising. In 1975, I was ready to enter my very first athletic competition of my life, a weightlifting contest. Never been able to do anything like that before. And friends of mine who had run gym, health club, had I'd run into them again. They lived in a different city than I did, and they left the state for a while, worked somewhere else, came back to Florida. They said, you've got to take this mind control course. Mind control? What do I want with mind control? They said, it's the best thing you can do to help your weightlifting. That's how they sold it to me. So I went to help my weightlifting. I got what I needed on the very first morning. When the instructor was talking about the brain, he said, the brain is like a computer, operates on a small amount of electrical energy. We did not have PCs back then, of course. That came about, 15 years later, we had the PC. No, about 5 years later, wasn't it? 5 or 6 years later, we had the PC. Did not have PCs yet. He said the brain is like a computer. But who programs the computer? The mind programs the computer. I thought that's the answer. I use my mind to tell my brain to operate the muscles. That's all it takes. That gave me the answer the first morning. But I stayed for the rest of the class anyway. I did not believe in ESP. I knew it was a fraud. I was already thinking about who to talk to on the Orlando Sentinel to write a story, an expose if they refused to give me my refund. I mean, I wasn't a skeptic. I was not a skeptic. I was a total disbeliever. I'm not the only one. Another of my instructors in Florida, the second instructor that I had, Marie Buckingham, she took the course because a friend of hers had taken it and thought it was so wonderful. And Marie knew it was a fraud, and she was studying. She had gone back to college, take some more college courses, and was studying a course in consumer fraud. So she was going to do more. All I could do was write a story about it. She was going to file charges. So we both became instructors eventually. And we are not the only ones who did that. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. There were times, even when I was teaching it, there were times that I would just kind of revert back to the old newspaper reporter and say, how can this be true? This has to be a fraud. But if it is, I'm the one committing the fraud. And I don't think I am. I think I'm telling the truth. It's just amazing that something can change so much like that. And when I stayed for the whole course. I wondered for years and years why I stayed for the whole course. Now that I understand more about it, as it's gone on and I understand more about it, I understand the process that it takes, starting way back with the relaxation and the mental house cleaning and those things, to just get us comfortable with one idea at a time until it finally got to the point that we could say, well, maybe there is such a thing as ESP. We tried what we were told to do, and it worked. So that's how I got into it. And that's why I'm such a believer that at first ESP experience, where I accurately detected that a 60-year-old woman in New York City, I was in Orlando, Florida at the time, taking the class in Orlando, Florida, 60-year-old woman in New York City had breast cancer. And when the orientologist who was presenting the case to me, a woman from New York that I didn't know, she didn't know me. There were 150 people in the class, and we just hooked up at random to work some cases. And when she told me, you are correct, that was that was it. There was some kind of a connection. It was not a physical connection, some connection on another level with another human being. And I thought, this is fabulous. We're not just the body. I'm not just this body that has muscle pains and a lousy personality. I never got along that well with other people. My little sister, the one who really likes me, said I became a nice person after mind control. What does she mean? I was always a nice person. But I just realized, I experienced the connections that we all have with each other and what we can do to help one another at that subjective level. We can't take advantage of each other at that level. We can't cheat each other. I'm not gonna do something that's not in my best interest, that's going to be harmful to me, but I'll do things that can help you. Isn't that wonderful that there's a dimension where that can take place? That's why my passion for it, and it's stayed the same for what's it been, 46 years now? Last November was 46 years, right, from 1975. And it just has never waned. It's been there. And I ended up moving to Laredo 40 years ago because Mr. Silva wouldn't come to Florida, wouldn't move to Florida. So I moved to Laredo. It's the same climate. It's nice and warm, which I like. No cold weather. It seldom freezes here. So I like that just fine. But I came here how could I not come here? How could a newspaper reporter not come to the source and be able to ask him questions whenever I wanted to? So any question you ask me, I probably asked him, although you've asked me some that I didn't ask him. You suggest, a few things you want to know. So I thought about it and thought about watching him and listening to him and observing, and asked Joe, am I right to think that this would be the way he operated? This would be the things he'd done? And Joe said, yes. Joe is Jose Silva Jr., Joe Jr., the first child born to Jose and Paula Silva. They had 10 children. Joe was the first one. He used others as case subjects to study them, to hypnotize him and see what would happen. He didn't do that to Joe. Joe was not a case subject. He had Joe operate a tape recorder and record what he was doing and observe what he was doing and keep track of it. So Joe was like the historian of that research. So I am so grateful that Joe is still with us. We're the same age. I'm so glad he's still with us because I'm still learning things from Joe. So,
that's terrific. Ed, this 1975 class, you mentioned another time that there was a heroin addict in the class who was able to cure himself. Was that Jerry Seavey?
Jerry Seavey is mentioned and I don't want to mention names, but Jerry is mentioned
he says
in the
quite
original
publicly
book.
that he cured himself.
No, Jerry's in the original book, so that's okay. Only if if they've talked about them, we could, but I'd rather not.
He talks about it in his classes, yeah.
I'd rather not. I mean, especially people who are no longer with us because they may be doing other things now. But yes, when I came to instructor training in 1977, Jerry Seavey was here. He won the President's Cup that year. And he got up and he did a sample of an introductory lecture and he talked about his heroin addiction. It was mentioned he said that was what he talked about in his introductory lecture. And it was in the Silva Mind Control Method book by Mr. Silva and Philip Mealy co-authored it. 1977 was when it was published. About 4 months before I was scheduled to come to instructor training, I thought, why am I going to instructor training if they're telling everybody how to do this? Then I realized most people aren't going to learn it from a book. We need a little more guidance to help us do it and answer our questions along the way. But Jerry talked about that. And he told us, I don't think he may not have said this in his intro, but he told us that he was actually mainlining heroin during the breaks in the class. They'd have a session for 45 minutes or an hour. And some of those breaks, he'd go in and mainline heroin. I met 2 other people, very similar stories, were heroin addicts, were on heroin, addicted to heroin when they took the course. All 3 of them were free of heroin. Jerry within 30 days. I think the other 2 used that same 30-day technique that's used for cigarette smoking, got off of heroin without withdrawal symptoms, without any problems, no DTs or anything. And all 3 of those 3 all went on to become instructors. So
about the other 2, wow. Yeah.
Jerry was a huge inspiration to me. Yeah. And he changed my whole way of thinking about how to present the course, how to teach the course. I was like so many people back then that had come into it for self-improvement, come into it just to get something I wanted for myself. That's the only thought that I had. Didn't even believe in ESP. And of course, I've always been involved in helping other people. That's why I was a newspaper reporter. People need to know what's going on. You can't make informed decisions unless you know what's going on. So I felt like I was providing a service by being a newspaper reporter. That's all I've ever wanted to do. Is I wanted to write books, write novels that people could escape their ordinary life and go someplace and just get away and feel good about themselves, have adventures, go places they'd never go in their real life. Didn't quite work out that way. I wrote a different type of book, but I have been able to introduce people to Jose Silva and what he accomplished. So in a way, I kind of accomplished what I dreamed of doing as a kid. But I just came to the class for myself, just to help myself, and that's what I was thinking about. So halfway through instructor training, it was 1 week. They had cut it back to just 1 week in 1977, Monday through Saturday, to noon Saturday. And about halfway through it, we were talking about when to introduce the idea of caseworking. The ESP sessions that we do, where we detect information about another person who's not present, somebody we don't know, we've never heard of, and use our ESP, our psychic ability, to detect information about their health. When would we introduce that to people? As we were leaving the classroom for a break, just lined up, going out in the row, I just sounding off like I often do, just being kind of a smart aleck. I said, well, why don't we introduce that idea after they've completed the course and accepted their certificate of completion and are no longer eligible to ask for a refund? That would be a good time to introduce it. And Jerry was right in front of him. He stopped, turned around, just kind of spun around, I said, that's not the reason I took the class. And then Jerry stopped, spun around, said, you didn't think that was the reason you took the class. Turned around and kept walking. I just stood there, and there was a big pileup behind me of people trying to get out of the door, through the door. I just stood there. I knew when he said that, he's right. That's not the reason I took the class. I thought I took the class to improve my weightlifting. Something else obviously was at work there and got me to take the class. So for my first introductory lecture on, I talked about caseworking within the first 15 or 20 minutes. I introduced it the same way it happened to Jose Silva. He didn't believe in ESP either. I did ask him that. After I'd been working here for 3 or 4 years and he knew enough about me, I thought maybe it'd be safe to ask him a few good questions. Maybe I'm not taking a risk. That's not really true. He never fired anybody. He just had a simple policy. We don't fire anybody. If if you're disabled, like I am now, can't work a full day, that's okay. Come in as many hours as you can and do what you can. As long as you're doing that, I'll keep paying you. And he did. There were people on the staff who'd been here for several years, as long as I knew them. In fact, for the 20 years I was here, there's at least one person for the 20 years I was here came in and did her work at her desk and went home. And he continued to pay her, although he could have done something else instead. He had that kind of loyalty to people. I don't know why, but he had that kind of loyalty to people. I appreciate it. We all appreciated it. But I did ask him one time, I said, did you believe in ESP? Did you think it was a real thing? He said, no, not at all. When Isabel started guessing his mind, he said, no, I did not believe in ESP. I said, in fact, I said, there are ways. Did you know, there are ways to do mind reading tricks. Did you ever do something like that? I'd heard that he had. I said, did you ever do that? Did you ever do like magic tricks or anything? He said, oh, yes. We used to go out and do magic tricks. And we had an ESP trick. I asked Joe recently about that, a mind reading trick. I asked Joe about that recently, and he says, oh, yeah, we'd go into a meeting or a club or someplace. We'd go, and he'd take several of the kids with him, several of his children with him. They said, we had a list. We had code words, 150 code words we had to memorize, all of those code words. So if we mentioned a pretty bracelet, there would be a code. There would be a code word. It wouldn't be pretty bracelet. There would be a code word that would mean it was a bracelet. Another code word would mean that we were holding his wallet. Another code word would be a person's watch. So he could go out in the audience and do what he did, use misdirection, come up with the item and use the code word. And however it worked, I guess the kids would do that. They would go out and find the object and use the code word. And then he would tell them, oh, that's the object you're holding. And it seemed like he was reading their mind. But when Isabel started guessing his mind, there were no code words. There was nobody else involved. There was no other possible explanation. So that's why he said, this is something I've got to investigate. It must be real.
So he did not believe in it to the point where he actually sort of fooled around and pretended he could. And then suddenly he realized it was real.
Exactly.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's fantastic, Ed. Wow.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So I'm not the only one. Marie Buckingham and I are not the only ones who were disbelievers. So was Jose Silva.
Right. So basically I'm sorry.
No,
Go
not
ahead,
really.
Pank.
That's a great point, because a lot of people, when we talk about ESP, say, oh, okay, that's quite crazy. That's quite. We talk about it with Lee a lot, because, like I explained to people, I say, oh, sometimes the first days of the basics, perhaps you will not like that. It's sometimes crazy stuff and stuff like that. And with Lee, we talk about that, and a lot of people are like us. I'm the first to be a non-believer, because I need to be very empiric. So I need to repeat to believe about something. And she explained to me that a lot of time people who disbelieve, at the end of the day, they say, oh, okay, it's possible, or it's interesting. And I like this idea that the founder have the same idea, because it's very, I think it's very positive, because I prefer people who say, I don't believe about that, and after that they just do some things and say, okay, perhaps something will happen, I will go deeper and deeper, than people who say, oh, I know the universe is so unbelievable. Sometimes you say, okay, I have a little worry about you. But when you know, even the founder say, perhaps, and okay, Isabel did that. That's great. I will church more. I like this idea, and I think it's very powerful for people to know that, because now when we talk about that, it's normal for us. But when we talk with new people or people who don't care about that, it's interesting to say, okay, it's normal way of thinking to don't believe in that and just do the experience and live the experience. And like you did, it's interesting to say, okay, she had a breast cancer. Okay, that's right. Okay, crazy. That's a nice stuff. Yeah.
Would you like a way to deal with that?
Yeah.
My first instructor, Paul Francella, said something that very first morning of class that I could not argue with it. He put me in a position where I had no choice but to go through and find out. My motto, I guess from the time I was in about the 5th grade, about 12 years old or so, 10 years old or so, my motto was don't believe anything that you see, don't believe anything that you hear, and only half of what you see. So Paul had a line that reminded me of that. He said, sometimes we believe something is true because we can explain it and understand it. Other times we believe something is true because we've seen it with our own eyes. We've heard it, we've seen it with our own eyes. But sometimes there are things that we can't explain and that we haven't seen, but we still believe that they're true because we've experienced them ourselves. We have had a personal experience that is true. And therefore, even if you can't show anybody, even if you can't explain it to anybody, you know that it's true. So the only way that I was going to find out about the class was to stay until the end. And I almost didn't go back for the second weekend, but I finally decided to. I realized now I had no choice. I was always going to. I was just trying to fight it, I guess. But I did go back and I did finish it because you could experience it. That's exactly what happened to Jose Silva. Now that you mentioned that makes sense. That was probably the only way that may have been the only way to get Jose Silva involved, was to simply show it to him, have him actually experience it without expecting it, without trying to. He wasn't trying to experience ESP. That wasn't his thought at all. I just reread from his autobiography where he talked about it. I was telling the story a little bit incorrectly. He was working with his children. He'd been working with his daughter, Isabel, his second child. Isabel was our first trained psychic. He didn't know he was training her to be a psychic, but he was helping her memorize her schoolwork so she could get the right answers on tests and make better grades. And he had read several poems to her, and he was very careful. He always wrote down what he was doing. So he had written down the poems, the order that he was going to read them. This one first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And he'd read them to her, and he needed to read them to her 3 times. He had experimented. He had tried different things, read them to him once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And he found that if he would read a lesson to the children 3 times, each time at a different level of mind, read it, do something different, bring them out or bring them partially out or take them deeper, do something different, give them something different to do, and then come back and read the lesson a second time. Do something different to be at another level of mind, come back and read it a 3rd time. He found 3 was the optimal number to do it, the optimal number of times. So he had done that. He had read it to her once, was coming back to read the poems to her another time, but he wanted to make it more difficult. So he changed the order that he was going to read them. He'd read, instead of this one first, he'd read this one first, this one second, this one third. Changed it around. Again, he wrote down the order that he was going to read them. So he had a sheet of paper there with the new order. Now this was going to be the first one. This was going to be the second one. And she started reciting it before he asked her for it. He was just looking to see what what the plan was. And she started reciting the second poem, not the first one, but the second one. He said, okay, well, next. And she started reciting the 3rd poem. She had it in the right order, but she was one ahead of him. And the next one, and the next, she was one ahead of him, but she got them all in the right order. So that intrigued him. A conventional scientist would have said, wait, you're messing up my experiment. Okay. Conventional scientist has a theory, and, I've got to do it this way so that the test will be valid. He didn't know anything. He hadn't had any classes that taught him how to conduct scientific research. He just did what he'd read about and what he thought was right. So he said it was obvious to him immediately that she was guessing my mind. That was a phrase he used. She was guessing my mind. So he thought, could this really be? I've got to find out if she really is guessing my mind. So I don't know what happened after that. That's as much as he wrote in the autobiography. And I never discussed it further with that. I did ask him, the only follow-up question I asked him, I said, did you ever find out why? Did you ever come up with a reason or an idea of why she was one ahead of you? Why she stayed one ahead of you? I said, no, I never did. So that's as far as that went. I wondered the other day when I was thinking about this, I wondered if that has to do with giving the idea that we can also detect what's going to happen in the future. Because that's what she was doing. She detected what he was going to ask her in the future. Some people don't like the idea that we can predict the future. And I realize that the way I phrased that on the website, that we can predict the future, or we have a guide who can predict the future for us, higher intelligence, a higher power, or somebody on the other side working for higher intelligence who helps us specifically. It's the concept of the mental video technique. Someone who can help us and who can guide us, who knows what's going to happen in the future. They don't technically know what's going to happen in the future. Nobody can. We can't know what happens until it happens. But somebody has thought about what they're going to do. He had a thought. That was fixed. That was already fixed in the present. She could detect his thought. Now, he could change his mind. He could change his mind. If he decided at the last moment to go to the next list and have a different poem, that could be the first one, that would have changed everything. So we can detect. Can you imagine the value of that? If we can learn to perfect that and really get good at that, maybe we've gone far enough now, and maybe we can do it well enough now. If we could get the leaders of every country in the world to learn this course, to learn to detect other people's thoughts and what their intentions are, they'd never have a war because it'd never be a surprise. Nobody could ever mount a surprise attack. Anybody trying to do something to put us at a disadvantage, to put you at a disadvantage or whatever, if you can detect it ahead of time, you can counter it before it ever happens. And we'll never get in a fight. Oh, that would be paradise.
Wow.
That would be paradise.
That's a brilliant way of describing. You don't read the future, but you read what's being planned for the future because the plan exists now. That is such an excellent way of describing it, Ed, because people are always worrying about that. Say, how can you read the future? Does that mean it's predestined? It's not predestined. It's just planned. Like you say, everyone can change their mind. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Exactly. It's there was some scientist, some PhD or PhD candidate or something. All they want to do is get published, I think. Finally realized PhD candidates want to get published. That's the big thing for them, to get published. So his question was, can information travel backwards in time? So what are you talking about? What do you mean? Information travel. What? So he finally ended up giving me this example. There's going to be an election. Well, this was a couple of years ago. Right now, he could say, there's going to be another election, another presidential election in the United States in 2024. 2.5 years from now, November 2024, there'll be another election. Can you tell me how somebody is going to vote in that election? Or can you tell me what the results of that election will be? There will be a result. It will be fixed. You will be filling out a ballot and casting that ballot. So when that's done, can that information travel back to 2022? I said, after it's fixed, it could, but it won't be 2022 anymore. If it does that, it can't. You cannot detect something that has not been impressed on physics. You cannot detect an event that has not yet taken place. You can detect the plans for that event. You can detect what is being planned, but plans can be changed. So that may change. And if it does, then somebody can come back and say, see, you were wrong about it, but you weren't wrong. that you were right at that moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Silva put it this way, says it this way: the present is composed of materialized thoughts that have already been materialized. The future is composed of conceived thoughts that have not yet been materialized. The past is composed of conceived thoughts that have already been materialized. The present is composed of conceived of thoughts. The present is materializing thoughts. Present is a process of materializing thoughts. I think I got them out of order some way. But the present is a process of materializing those thoughts. So if it's already been materialized, or if they are being materialized right now, then they're being fixed in physics. That's why they are so much easier to detect. Let me correct one thing right now about lotteries, picking lottery tickets. Now, Joe Jr. tells me that he's pretty good at picking winning lottery numbers. Never the big multi-million-dollar jackpot, but he says he is ahead picking lottery numbers. Maybe he needed to demonstrate something to himself to do that. I don't know. He never has told me his secret. But Jose Silva did conduct research for several, for many months. I don't know how long, but for quite a while. He said he conducted research for quite a while on the Mexican lottery to see if the children could detect the winning lottery numbers in the Mexican lottery. If I understand correctly, back when he was doing this in the 1950s or 1960s, I think they were having drawings 3 times a week for $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, not multi-million, but, or sometimes smaller amounts. But they were having drawings 3 times a week. So he would have children experimenting with different ones, trying different ways of doing it to project them, to imagine themselves standing right next to the person who was doing whatever it was, a little tumbler, and the little ball comes out and what number is on the ball. And they'd pick the different numbers. And he said a couple of times while they were researching that, there were 2 or 3 times, I think he said, that they actually detected a winning number, the sequence of numbers that they actually got a winner, but never for the correct date.
Yep.
So you would have had to buy the lottery tickets for every one of those lotteries for every one of those months, and you wouldn't have ended up with the profit if you had done that. He said they never could correlate the time. He realized that even if they came up with a way to be sure they were detecting the correct number, they could never correlate the time because time had not been impressed on physics. He said time, there is no such thing as time. Time is our own invention. Now, you can ask me what he meant by that. You'll be wasting your time. I don't know. I have no idea what that means. But I guess it makes sense. I saw something on television, on the public television, about the problems they had with railroads back in the 1900s, I guess it was. You get on a train at 9 o'clock in Laredo and it gets to San Antonio at 10 o'clock. But San Antonio clocks were set different than ours were. So there was another train leaving San Antonio at 10:30, but it was 10:30 their time, which was actually 9:30 our time. So the train hadn't gotten there yet. So everybody just set the clocks wherever they want them. So they had to come up with a national standard for what, setting time. And now, of course, we have the worldwide standard for setting time. So, yeah, I guess time is our invention. So what we would have to do is use some geophysical event or something. When the moon comes up in Laredo, or the sunrise in Laredo, or something like that as a point of reference. So he never did find a way to correlate time in the future to determine that. So no, we can't help you. We can't teach you how to. By the way, when somebody asked me now, I finally realized if the idea finally came to me. I don't come up with ideas. They come to me. The idea finally came to me that when somebody would call the office and say, tell me how to pick a winning lottery number. I ask them, if I knew how to pick a winning lottery number, you think I'd tell you? Seriously? You think I'd be here working for the salary I get at Laredo, Texas, if I knew how to win $1 million in the lottery? Go ask somebody who's done it multiple times, not just once. Once doesn't mean anything. Once is interesting. Once means we'll conduct some experiments with you, but don't ask somebody who knows. I had commercial psychic call one day. He was having a lot of people calling up, the phone line you dial in, and for $5 a minute, or however long it is, they'll help you out, use their psychic ability to help you what to look forward to in the future, what to do, decisions to make. And he said a lot of the people he was getting, he had a feeling they were just looking for an audience more than an answer. I said, yeah, we get a lot of those. And he said also, or maybe I told him that's a lot of what we get. And he says, yes, me too. And I said, a lot of time, I think they just want comfort. They really just want to be comforted. He said, oh, me too. He says, I don't really know what to tell them that's going to be helpful. I tell them things and they thank me for it, and I really don't know. And we talked about that. So he was concerned about the same thing. They're calling and giving their money to somebody who's sitting there making $2 an hour back then, a little more than that now, I guess, for minimum wage, maybe $10 an hour for sitting on a telephone talking to somebody. If they're so smart, why can't they go get a job making some real money, making some decent, a decent salary instead of doing that? So be careful. Mr. Silva said, if you want to go, they could be valuable for Silva graduates to go to a psychic, a professional psychic, proven professional psychic, to get information, to get some help, especially if you have psychic ability too. They can kind of tap into your own psychic ability and come up with some good answers for you. Just make sure that the person you go to is a real psychic and knows what they're doing. For instance, he went to a real psychic recently. He went to this lady, went to her house. He knocked on the door, knock, knock, knock. She says, "Who's there?" He left. You'd have to ask. You're not the one for me.
I have a question. It's quite interesting because what you explain, it's a lot about the timeline. So I remember when I read the autobiography, when I talked with Lee, during the Sunday, a lot of the time, Jose worked on his children about regression, a lot of hypnotic regression. So it's interesting. Did you know how he was focused on time? When I listened to you, for me, it's like the time, the past and the future was something very important for Mr. Silva. So did you feel that, or is it a key point of the method, the time, the way where we take information in the time, the way we can move in the time, in the past, in the future, to change our way of thinking, way of being, and create our future and stuff like that? Do you feel that the time, it was a main point for Mr. Silva?
Yeah, like, why is the future to the left? And why do we face the south wall?
Yeah.
Lee, didn't you explain that in class? I try my best to avoid explaining it. It's confusing. It all came from experience. It all came from his experiences. He remember, he started just to help his children. Well, he started reading psychology out of curiosity. And when one of his children, it was Ricardo. Ricardo died several years ago. I think he might have been the third child. Is that who it was, after Isabel? And he died a few years ago. I like Ricardo a lot. Ricardo brought home a bad report card or two. So he started, all right, I got to find something that can help them. I got to do something to help him in school. When he read that Freud had worked with hypnosis, that's what introduced him to hypnosis. Freud did not continue with it. But it turned out Jose Silva was an excellent hypnotist, very, very good. So he began to work with hypnosis. And somewhere along the way, that led him to age regression. So out of curiosity, he began to study age regression. He began to age regress people. And Isabel was an ideal subject for that. She was really outstanding with that. He got with the children where he would regress them back in their current life, which was only 7, 8, 9, 10 years until they got back to their birth. So how could he go further back? Had to go into prenatal age regression. And that's a whole nother subject if you want to get into that someday. And it's a subject with a lot of questions and very few answers. A lot of information known, but very few conclusions, just due to the nature of it. Anyway, he got into the prenatal age regression. So you skip 3 years because it's a 3-year void. And nobody likes being in a void. Who are you? I don't know. So he just skipped back 4 years and you're somebody else. Well, eventually he could get back to another life ahead of that, before that, before that, before that, and could go back 1,000 years or more and continue to come up with stories. So what he would do is set up, what do you call it in hypnosis, a key or a code or something where if I touch your forehead, you'll go back to that time. A post-hypnotic suggestion or something. He would set that up where he could just regress them back very, very quickly. So you're back 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years. And it was going so fast. And what is it now, Lee? The children started leaning to one side.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. Let me see. I'm facing north right now, so I've got it backwards. So they leaned to the left. Was that the way it was? I leaned to the left.
It was very confusing, but
Yeah.
I remember thinking, my God, it's actually back to front.
Yeah.
They
what it was, the images were going.
They were moving to the left, and he compared that to inertia in a train or train momentum. But it's going really fast that way. You tend to lean to the right. So,
Well,
but
it made sense to him.
the left.
Well, I was thinking like this. Imagine you're facing south. Okay. So let me imagine that I'm facing south now in my house. That means the sun rises to my left. Okay.
Yeah.
So the sun goes up, overhead and goes from my left to my right. That's the direction the images were going on their mental screen, on the children's mental screen, if you want to look at it that way. So the images were going by, flying by in front of them from left to right, but very fast. And they were going so fast, it was causing them to lean. Well, I lean to the right when I do that. Whatever it was, whichever direction it was, they were leaning one way or the other. Other people can tell you that. They were leaning to the side. And he asked them, he didn't know why. He asked them, started asking the children, why are you leaning over? And they told him, oh, the images are going by so fast when you do that. When he progression back to the present time, the images were going the other way, so they were leaning the other direction. So, okay. When we go to the past, when we go into the past, images are coming from one side. When we go into the future, images are coming from the other side. So you figured that out. Okay, that's what we've got. That's why we have the mirror of the mind. When I took the course in 1977 was when they changed it and said to move the mirror. Up until then, the mirror was in one spot, which I was very happy with. I didn't like it when he said to move the mirror because then I had to explain it. However, my very first class,
the mirror didn't move until the mid.
It didn't move to start with. The picture showed two mirrors, but the mirror didn't move. The picture in the manual showed two mirrors, but the mirror didn't move. Some people were putting the two mirrors, and some people were doing it the wrong way. My very first class, I just left the mirror there because it was my first class. I was excited enough. I didn't need something else to have to remember. I just said, I'm doing it the way I've been doing it for 2 years and during training. I left it there. The second weekend, we did the projection the home exercise and faced the south wall. Somebody asked, why are we facing the south wall? I said, oh, goody. I get to explain it. So you see how my explanation is 40 years later. Here's what my explanation of it is. I still don't know how to explain it right. So I did that. This one woman in class, pretty well off, inherited a lot of money. And somebody had stolen it from her. Somebody had embezzled it. If I married her, divorced her, a lawyer, took all her money. That's why she came to class. She wanted to write a book and expose him. After the course, she said, I'm not going to do that. This is not worth it. There are other ways that I can warn people about what to do. She had just was not going to be vindictive after the class. It's amazing what this class can do to us without even trying, even if we're not intending it. But she came back, she says, now I know what happened. Now I know what went wrong. She had told us, when we asked about successes and so forth, she'd had some successes, but not her hair. She had gone to the hairdresser during the week, and it did not come out the way she wanted it to. The hair did not look like what she had pictured. She was very good visualizer, had great visualization. She knew exactly what she wanted. She did not get it. When I explained or tried to explain the south wall and where that the future was to the left, she said, that's why my hair came out wrong, because I put it on the right. I moved the mirror to the white frame mirror to the right.
No.
That was tremendous for me. I think that probably the reason I did not move the mirror on the previous Sunday. Probably the reason I had not explained that, although I didn't know it, probably somebody on the other side stopping me from doing that. So I would get that message, because that gave me real confidence that, hey, this is true. I never told her. She had no idea of that. So her moving it the wrong way and having such good visualization, she got what she didn't want instead of what she did. And the next time she came to graduate meetings, we held graduate meetings for the next couple of years. I was still in Florida before I moved. And she kept coming to meetings, and she got great results after that. From then on, she did. So that absolutely convinced the old skeptical newspaper reporter. That convinced me that this time movement is the right thing. And certainly that helped me to teach the class, to encourage people to take the class, and so forth, to have that. Anyway, back to the theory. The theory came later. Most of the time, he had experiences and then looked for theories to try to explain his experiences. And his theory was, okay, if I'm moving from one dimension to another, I'm moving from the objective dimension, the physical dimension, to the subjective dimension, a mental dimension. For a long time on the chart, the Scalar Brain Evolution chart, we use the word spiritual interchangeably with subjective. So it'd be objective and subjective, or objective and spiritual. After he came up with the new course, I realized we had a third thing, the other side. The other side, what religion would call heaven, where higher intelligence resides. That's not the subjective dimension. That kind of changed 2 or 3 of the concepts that we had for, what was it, more than 30 years that we had been teaching. Had to make some adjustments. That upset me just a little bit, because I had to go back and change manuals. I mean, I tried to get somebody to talk me out of it. I asked Pepe Romero, Alex Gonzalez. I mean, I asked them, I said, please tell me I'm wrong about this. Please tell me I'm wrong. He said, no, you're right. We have to have a third thing. And everything comes in threes, doesn't it? And all we had was objective and subjective. So we had to have objective, subjective, and spiritual. So anyway, this is just objective and subjective. We move from the objective dimension to a subjective dimension. That's going from the physical world to the mental world, the mental dimension. So in order to see, you're in the mental dimension, in order to observe what's going on in physics, you would have to turn around and look back. It would be like if you leave the planet and turn around and look back at the planet. Now, if I turned around and looked back at the planet, and the future is to my left and the past is to my right, that's right. Future is to my left and the past is to my right, I would have to have exited either the North Pole or the South Pole, wouldn't I? I'd have to be at one of the poles, looking back that way, and see the Earth turning. So if I'm out the North Pole and it's spinning that way, the future is coming from over here. Okay? So therefore, I have exited out the North Pole. I'm facing south. So from then on, what he had people do when he wanted them to do their psychic work was to imagine that you were facing south, not with your body, just with your mind. So the only part that I really don't understand is which way the images are going. I still don't have that. But if you're looking south, the new day, the sunrise, the earth, the revolutions of the earth, it's coming. Or is it? I don't know. I don't know. It still gets me confused, but that
reassures me that I'm still confused if you are. So.
I know. That's why I just try to avoid. Here's the answer I try to get away with when people ask why south. It just wants all of us doing the same thing. Okay. So let's all imagine we're facing south. And a lot of times people will accept that. A lot of times they catch me and realize what I'm doing and say, no, tell us the truth. Tell us what you really thought. But that's the idea behind that. The future is south. Now, if we want help from higher intelligence, we have to go into a totally different dimension, the other side, the dimension where we came from when we were born, where we go back to when we die. Brainwave frequencies, the first brainwave frequencies ever detected in the fetus, the first human type brainwave frequencies. First brainwave frequencies you would find in a human being are delta, the slowest frequencies, and they gradually increase. runs all the way up and down the scale early on, just like it's checking to make sure the fetus is checking to make sure the brain is working correctly, and then goes back to delta and stays there. The last brain frequencies detected in a human being before they die are delta frequencies. So he says that's the delta doorway. That would explain why we don't have conscious awareness at delta. Some people can become aware of some things at delta, but we can't activate our mind and act on it or do anything like that. That would also explain something he mentioned, that 1972 professional course in advanced mind control. Remember that one? I don't know if you've listened to all of that, but there's something he said in there that got my attention 30 years ago, I guess, when Marie Buckingham, my teacher, the one who was going to file fraud charges against him, she was the one who recorded that class and gave me the tapes when I started training to become an instructor. One of the things that he says in there, he was talking some, I guess, about the scale of brain evolution chart, how alpha is a full octave. An octave is 7 notes of music, 7 colors of the rainbow. So the beta octave is 14 to 21. You repeat one of the colors, you repeat one of the notes. So there's 7 notes. You repeat the first one, and that as the 8th one. So the 7 with the first one repeated again, that gives you the 8 for the octave. So 7 to 14 is beta. 14 to 21 is beta. 7 to 14 is alpha. 0 to 7, well, half of 0 to 7. 4 to 7 is theta. It's only half an octave. So I heard him say that on that recording, and he went on from there, and he didn't mention it again. And I have listened to that recording more than a few times, learning what I could from it. And that's all very interesting. Wonder why he didn't mention the fact that delta is also half an octave. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, later, there's another recording that we got on all the online courses that we've got set up now and got different places. 2 of those videos, 2 of those programs that he did for local television, he talks about the scale of brain evolution chart. Didn't have enough time to complete what he wanted to say in the first one, so he finished the following week. But the first one, he did as much as he could, and he got to delta, and he didn't talk about delta being half an octave, but he did talk about the delta doorway and going out the delta doorway, and human intelligence comes in through the delta doorway and learns to operate the body like he had trouble finding the word he wanted. Now he says like a puppet. I think he's talking about a hand puppet. So human intelligence, there is also biological intelligence, operates the body. I suspect that's what hypnosis works with for the most part, and what 101 and 202 works with, the first half of the mind control course. But the human intelligence works with the human body like it's a hand puppet and can control what we do. So we can use our mind to control that. Mind control, psyche orientation is what we talk about. It's what the course is all about. Can do that. So I put all that together, and one other thing he had that's online for the public to hear, his closing comments at the 1995 convention. A good friend of ours insisted, we had a video crew out there to record some of the workshops we were doing at the convention. Victor Covens insisted, he said he'd pay for it if we record that closing comments. I said, we don't need that. We got audio tapes. So I said, no, please videotape it. Please pay him to get a video. He says, I'll pay for it. We actually never got charged for it, so we got it for nothing. But we did record that. I kept dubbing it off. Every time I get better equipment, I'd dub off a higher quality of it. And finally, the 3rd or 4th time I heard it, I finally heard him say something that registered. He said, plants have a subjective and an objective faculty. Well, we know that thanks to Cleve Baxter's research. Remember Cleve Baxter, the guy with the lie detector, was bored one night. He was a night person like me, sitting up all night in his lab or studio. He had a lie detector school. So he was in his office late one night, wondering if he was looking at a plant, big old dragon tree, big long stem plant, and wondering what I could do to put stress on the plant. That's what a lie detector does. What somebody, when you're interrogating a suspect, you want to put them under stress. Like you ask them a few simple questions and then say, where were you on the night of the murder? And they should tense up a little bit. When they do, that'll register on the lie detector. So he thought, what could I do to stress out a plant? Change it. He said, well, let me see, maybe that dragon plant, let me put some electrodes on it and see what I can do. He got a reading. It was within range of his equipment. So he watered the plant and very quickly got a reading. So, wow, that water sure got up to the leaves in a hurry. Thought, what else could I do? And he remembered, well, his secretary was a smoker and she had cigarettes and she also had matches at her desk. He thought, if I go get some matches, then I could come in here and burn a leaf. And the plant, the machine started going crazy, just going wild on him, with extremely agitated when he had the thought. He didn't move. He didn't move and go to the other room. He didn't get up off the sofa. He didn't have any matches. He didn't bring any foreign matter into the room. The only thing that changed was he was thinking about the leaves burning. He had a thought that would harm the plant. And there was this reaction. He said it was just like Mr. Silva with Isabel. He said it was obvious to him immediately that plant had read his mind. And how could that be? And for the rest of his life, that was in 1966, the same year that Jose Silva began teaching the public, the paid classes. And he taught that first class up in Amarillo, the same year of the very first Super Bowl, American football Super Bowl, which people go crazy about now. They love the Super Bowl. Yeah, that's how we can remember when the first Super Bowl. That's how I remember when the first Super Bowl was. Some people might remember the opposite direction. Use that to remember when the first mind control class was, the first public class. But yeah, Cleve Baxter went on with that. So yes, we know that plants can detect our thoughts or our emotions. I think Mr. Baxter conducted enough tests to help to demonstrate it was also mental at a distance. Within his presence, it could be detecting his aura. Could be detecting from his aura, which is still in the subjective dimension. It's still not, I think it is. I guess it depends on how you define things. But anyway, okay, so plants have a subjective and an objective. Inanimate matter doesn't. Inanimate matter has only objective, does not have a subjective. It cannot detect our mind. Our mind cannot react to our mind. We cannot control it with our mind. You cannot control a piece of metal with your mind. You can influence a plant with your mind. We do a lot of experiments with that. We can, obviously, with animals. Animals have an objective and a subjective. Humans have an objective and a subjective. And one more thing, humans have a spiritual factor. So maybe about the 5th time or the 10th time or the 20th time I had heard that on that video of those closing comments, it finally registered with me. Wait a minute. What are we talking about here? We're talking about something beyond what we've got here on planet Earth in this dimension. There's something beyond that. That answers my questions. If I can influence a dog subjectively, does that mean that the dog has a soul in a religious sense? Humans have a soul, so we can communicate soul to soul. That's what I had been thinking. That's what we had been teaching. Some of the instructors, I don't know that Mr. Silva was teaching exactly that way. He didn't use the term soul. He used human intelligence instead of soul for that purpose. But that actually did it. There is a third thing. So those things, the three things combined, let me know there really is something different. Oh, do I wish he were here with us so I could talk to him about that? I have a few questions myself.
I invite him into my laboratory regularly. If I really But yeah, it would be great if he was here physically with us and we could actually. Yeah.
Well, so many ideas come to me that I have no idea where they come from. And I say I have no idea. So many ideas come to me, and I cannot track down any sequence of events or any sequence of thoughts that I had that would cause me to have that idea. So I think they're coming from the other side. I'm not saying that I think Jose Silva is still giving them to me, but the first 3 years, it sure felt like it. there were things that happened. There were things that sometimes I felt like he was putting pressure on me the way he did when he was still here. I'd still not be quite satisfied with something. Are you sure we shouldn't do it the other way? He said, just go ahead and do it. Not give me a choice, just go ahead and do it. Okay. Yes, sir. If you say so. And I'd go ahead and do it. And he'd always turn out to be right, of course. There were times after he was gone. There were times working on the Ultramind book. After he died, he helped me with the first 4 chapters, and then he died. So I finished it up. I got in one argument with my young editor. She was quite young. And I told her, look, I'm the one with the experience in this field, so why don't we just do it my way? And that was the weekend. And she said, no, we're going to do it. I'm the editor. We're going to do it my way. Oh, wow. No editor, none of the book editors. Of course, I never said that to any of my book editors before either. So Sunday night, after a couple of days and a couple of nights sleeping on it, all of a sudden, I realized that Sunday afternoon, I realized she was right. Not only was she right, but she realized there was something that I should change about the way we were organizing some of the follow-up products that we were putting together for people. That if I rearranged it a little bit, it would make the product a lot more useful. And it's really based on that same concept that she was telling me. And when she was telling me these two things don't go together, she was right. They don't go together. They should be done separately. So I called up and left a message on her voicemail. I said, you're right. I apologize. Never mind. Let's do it your way. So I called her up afterwards and apologized in person. I said, just one question. Have you ever spoken like that to any of your other authors? She said, no. So why did you talk that way to me? Why did you say something like that to me? She says, I don't know. And I said, well, don't worry about it. I know. It's not your fault. Somebody else put you up to it. So don't worry about it. And I'll tell you, that absolutely was the way Jose Silva would have told me. Another one, I won't tell you the whole story, but the thought came to me in the busiest intersection in Laredo, the one down where KGNS television headquarters are, right off Interstate 35 at Delmar Boulevard. If you've ever been in that intersection, Lee, the busiest intersection in Laredo. And the Friday afternoon rush hour traffic, cars everywhere. So the car right ahead of me was making a left turn. I was going straight. So I went ahead and pulled out there because when the light changed, they could make the left turn. I could get on across before the other cars needed to come there. But that car, instead of making a left turn, waited and waited and waited. And by the time they made the left turn, other cars were going by in front of me. I couldn't go. I'm sitting in the middle of this biggest intersection in Laredo, busiest intersection in Laredo, rush hour traffic, cars going by every which way and all over the place. And I had realized what had happened and that it was exactly what Jose Silva would have done, exactly the way he would have just backed off and set up a situation that I couldn't argue with, and I would have to go ahead and do it the way he wanted to do it. I was sitting out there laughing out loud, just big laughs, thinking to myself, all these drivers must think I'm nuts. Completely crazy, sitting here in this traffic jam, this mess that I've created, laughing as hard as I am. Some of them probably thought some evil thoughts towards me too. But there were some things like that I really thought just sure seemed like him. Pepe Romero had the same idea. Pepe Romero had been one of his closest confidants there at the office for a long time. And had worked for him ever since Pepe graduated from college, since the early 70s. Had worked for him. So that was, 25 years or something Pepe had worked for him. Was like a member of the family. So, he seemed to have a lot of the same experiences that I did. I wish I'd written them down now. I wish Pepe had written his down so that we could be more accurate. And we could have been more accurate at the time in going back and thinking about it and when it happened. And we could have known when that stopped. When I realized it stopped, it had been more than 3 years. So I tried to think back to when did it stop? Approximately 3 years. That's the period of time between lives and the age regression research. So who knows? We'll let somebody else research that.
Ed,
yes.
We want to get everything we possibly can out of you, obviously, but we don't want to exhaust you in one session. So that we can have you come back again over and over. I think we ought to literally close up for now and plan lots of other sessions. But we want to respect your time and not have you say afterwards, oh, that was too much, because we want you again and again. I'm sure.
It's definitely time for me to rest.
Okay.
See what happens? This is what I'm talking about. What happened once
get
once you get me started, it's hard to stop me.
It was sure, but I saw 1 hour. I said, okay,
Ah.
for me it was 15, 30 minutes, like that. He can rest himself.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. Okay.
I'll rest the next 2 days. It'll take me about 2 days to rest up from this. Literally,
Okay.
take me about that long to rest up from this. So yeah, let me know when you want to do some more.
We
And,
would
Yeah.
love to do some more.
This
I feel like we're only
energizes.
just beginning.
Yeah, this energizes me, and that's the problem. I get energized. I feel great. Once we stop and we get off of this,
Yeah,
I'll still
yeah.
feel good for
So-
about 10 minutes or so.
Let's read the
Then I'll
future
think, oh, where's the
and
bed?
not
I'm
let you
going
be
to
too
sleep.
tired afterwards.
Yeah. All right.
We will
Okay.
take time. We will choose another slot by mail. Like that. When you feel you're good, you say, okay, this day I'm good, and we will do it again. So
I'll
that's
let you know. I'll let you know what I'm feeling up to, and then whatever time works good for you.
well.
We can-
I think this hour is good. It's 8 for me. It's 7 for you, and it's
It's
6 1
7 for me.
1 o'clock,
I
yeah,
don't
1
have
p.m.
anything
for
the
me.
radar.
1 p.m. for you. So this hour is good, I think, for everybody. Now it's just let us know when you are good, and
Okay.
we will take care to take
Okay.
30 minutes. Not, but if you have a lot of energy, do it. It's great for us. We learn a lot, and for me, there are a lot of questions were coming, so it's nice. It's nice.
Good. I like the questions, and I like
Yeah.
these things happening. And you can edit whatever we've got there. You can do it in sections if you want to, of course. Do a little bit here, and you know how to do that, of course. When you ask a question and I get started, and then cut it off right as it starts to get interesting, and say, "We'll continue next time."
Yeah. Okay, no problem. We will do like that. So I want to thank you, and I will just stop the record, and after we can just say bye. So thank you, you two, for all these moments. Thank you, Ed. It's very interesting to listen all your story, your knowledge, and all what you know. Lee, you are Lee, so you are great. And thanks to be you. And like I told last time, we will do that several times. So just for French people who speak English, just listen. Let me know if you have some question that we didn't answer with Lee in other video. You send it to me, and after that, I can share with Ed and with Lee, and at this moment we will have some ID, energy, and stuff like that. So thank you very much, and see you later. Bye bye.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much. Ed.
Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.